People have always been dependent on their environment, and accordingly on the actions of the state and the economic situation. So then America turned into an empire of consumption, people increasingly began to pretend being someone else, pursuing the ideals imposed by the society. But what if people are trapped in circumstances where there is simply no right to choose? They are obligated not only to equalize with others, but also to forget about their ambitions and the right to stand out. How does it affect their everyday life? Studying Romerstadt as an example of a new town outside of Frankfurt, I realized how massive the problem of shortage of housing could get. The town was built after the First World War and aimed to accommodate minimum income groups. Facing such a problem, the state usually doesn't consider the individual needs and chooses mass production and prefabrication as a solution. At first, concrete prefabricated housing was used in Germany and France, and then the technology spread all over the world. I became interested in this topic because in my country, in Russia, shortage of housing was a critical issue as well. In 1930s, when Khrushchev was in power of USSR, Soviet engineers studied German experience of building social housing. Before the initiation of mass construction, people lived in barracks and dormitories, such as these ones, still preserved in Arkhangelsk. In 1952, almost 4 million people lived without electricity, sewerage, and central heating. The rest of the population lived a little better in densely populated communal apartments. In 1955, the mass construction of panel houses began. The whole country turned into one huge factory with an established mechanism. Concrete prefabricated blocks were symbols of rational future and gave people hope for a better life. Families received their tiny apartments in new buildings at the expense of the state. Many still remember this as a moving into a luxurious castle, since they no longer needed to huddle in a room with 20 neighbors. Construction was the main goal of every person in a socialist state. Everyone contributed, with a workforce, films, and posters. However, we have come a long way since the beginning of 20th century, but these prefabricated 5-story houses still reach 30% of the total number of apartment buildings. And if we consider all the series of panel houses, which are about 90 different types, the percentage increases to a number of 55. For decades, the state has changed the number of stories and sections, orientation and facing of buildings. But what remained unchanged was obtaining the minimum cost of a square meter at a high rate of construction, keeping the same apartment plans, style, and technology. Russia is located in 3 climatic zones: Arctic, subarctic, and temperate. In different climatic conditions, it is necessary to apply a different approach to construction, which is barely taken into account in Soviet buildings. Thus, in some regions of Russia, people continue to live in houses built in the 50s and 60s, although the surface life of buildings was meant to be about 50 years. Authorities prefer to demolish houses one by one and move people from there instead of renovating them. Even in the cities of federal significance, this procedure may be delayed, and in underfunded towns, residents are waiting for relocation for years or even decades. It leads to strong outflows of the population to the central district and formation of ghost towns, especially in places initially founded around factories and mines, which were later recognized as unprofitable. Due to the improper development of the Russian territory and the lack of budgets for most regions, people themselves got used to taking care of their neighborhoods and backyards. In Russia, there is a widespread culture of cooperative construction, which is considered both as a forced measure and as a place where people can somehow open up creatively. Shifting the attention to the small scale of Soviet private life, we can see the desire to establish a sense of ownership in the new provided flats. There was a conflict connected to ideology due to the socialist idea of withdrawal from the temptation of consumerism. Buying things for the apartment was something new and exciting, however, it was associated with greed and individualism. The desire for consumption also ran into the inability of the Soviet industry to meet the needs of the population in consumer goods. In the condition of a commodity deficit, things have become symbols of social status. Receiving rare interior items was a celebration for the entire family. Being conscious of how much effort was thrown into the arrangement of one apartment and into creating a comfortable environment in the living areas, the affection to the places becomes rather natural. The current resettlement program doesn't give people a chance to keep the habitual place of residence. The project is based on the concept of renovation of panel houses. However, the aim is to adapt to the particular regions and districts. There is a chance to bring the oppressed cities back to life and implement the rich history and culture into the new renovation designs. While improving infrastructure, individual opinions must be taken into account. To make a socialist illusion of choice go into the past, we have to keep up with the times and experiment. What if we could take one district as a subject for private investigation and rebuild it from scratch with the use of materials available there? I took Petropavlovsk as a first example, as it has a diversity of natural environment and it experiences a strong population outflow at the moment. A group of volunteers could oversee the redevelopment of the area from the very beginning. They would be given a choice of their preferred location with different advantages, such as proximity to workplace or to river or ocean shore. People could also choose from a row of public space options by voting with their future neighbors. Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky is a seismic activity region. 5-story buildings were reinforced with concrete monolithic structures there. However, there are other ways of seismic retrofit as an alternative, such as shear walls and cross bracing, which could also embed public spaces into the building. The intention is to come up with an alternative to a factory of faceless building production established in the USSR. A new part of the factory would ideally reveal the parts which people themselves changed and built in the microdistricts, houses and flats in order to adapt to circumstances and climatic conditions. These points would be covered differently in a row of regions in Russia prior to the beginning of renovation. In some cities, it is only possible to make minor changes, such as applying insulating layers to the walls. But in towns with decreasing population, circumstances allow to make more interventions due to incomplete occupancy by residents. The issues of chaotic balconies look, lack of public space, small layouts of apartments could be addressed keeping the position of the load-bearing walls in the buildings.